I'm back after working on this for a little while, so let me talk you through what I have been doing and some of the decisions I made. I don't have a whole lot of loops hanging off the edge now because it looked like a spirograph and I couldn't unsee that, so I really needed to do something. So what I did is I just sort of tucked them up here and in a few places and made them give me a different level. If you can see a little bit. So, it's a little bit higher where I tuck them together and tack them down. And again, because this is very soft fibers, I'll be able to stitch right through it. And you can see as I've been stitching on this, the yarn has already started to unravel a little bit and give me some fuzzy bits, which I really enjoy. I've added some more drizzle stitches. This is with a heavier yarn and this is with an embroidery floss. And I really like the look of the embroidery floss. I can either let it go up or I can tack it down. My difficulty on this piece has really come from not having enough variety in colors. I think this idea of couching down a lot of material, a lot of fiber first is going to really work best for me, at least with a multicolored background. I did find some yarn that's multicolored and I might try that. So I basically have been doing just tons and tons of bullion knots. I did the little, using the ribbon, I did do some French knots with them, and then I decided it actually worked out better just to kind of gather it up. And again, the color's not really that different, but it does give a little texture and a little bit of a shine to it. So I think what's next is going to be a bunch of French knots to fill in, and then I did grab beads. And I don't have that many red beads either. But I was thinking I'll leave the little ones for later, but I do have some large ones that might work. And it's hard. It's hard. They're not quite right. And I have to decide if I want to do a wide variety. See, I could fill in those spaces with beads. I think the large ones are going to be too large. So I might need to find something that's kind of small, like that. So I will play around with some beads. I'm going to leave the little ones for the very end. These guys have kind of reddish tones, so I could probably use some of those, but I think I always find it easiest to add the beads at the end. And I do want to see if I can add some of this lace in to give just another kind of texture. I like it when things are kind of sticking up. So let's see what we can do with that. So I've got some lace and I'm just going to cut a chunk, not in any kind of shape. I just want a little piece of lace. And it's not because you're going to see the lace, it's all about the color and texture. And I'm just going to kind of try to gather it up, which is hard. And then, let's see, what do I think about putting it? Yeah, if I put it up against what I've got going on here. And now we're going to have, now we have just that little bit of something sticking up. So I think adding that around here is going to be a good idea. Whenever I do these little, whether it's with lace or little bits of sari silk or fabric, I just do a couple little tacking stitches to hold it down. And when you do that, you can sort of shape where you want it to sit on your piece. So now I think it's time to add some French knots, and I've just got some thin wool that I'm using double strand of, and I'm just going to go along and just start filling in some of these places. I can do a single layer, I can build it up even taller, and then kind of see where I can come in above the cords. And what I love about doing French knots for something like this is they don't have to be perfect French knots. And in fact, they're almost better if they're not. So I might leave a really long tail here and make them really loose so that some of the loop shows up, and that just adds another layer of texture. See, my fibers that I have couched down are starting to unravel, which is just wonderful. I'm going to have all those wonderful loose threads just kind of going willy-nilly all over the piece, and I like that effect. It's not a yarn to use to couch down if you want to keep everything very pristine. And it's not something you would want to probably use if you were going to use it on clothing you were going to wash. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and fill in some French knots, and then I'll be back. I have done a few things off camera. I filled in all my empty spaces with French knots. I also did French knots all the way around the edge here, and that's going to give me my circle when I take this off, and I think we're about ready to take it off. It's going to be harder to add two things while it's on the hoop. And what am I going to add? I believe what I want to add are more bullion knots. I love the bullion knots I have so far, but I think I want more texture, so I'm going to raise it up with more bullion knots. And I want to add the drizzles now. I experimented with some fatter threads. I'm not too crazy about these two here, so I'm thinking I might actually tack them down and there'll be something different. And then I might do something else. I might tack these down, or I might do something different. I really like this skinny one that was done with embroidery floss, so I might do some more of those. But it's very close to being done. I think more bullion knots and possibly some drizzles and then beads. But let's take it out of the hoop and see what it looks like. Yeah, I like having put those around. Now, I'm not sure what end is up. Maybe if I twist this, this might be my top. Or maybe it's like this. But I kind of like it like that. And so this tells me when I'm done with this, this is sort of what it's going to be like. And I like this idea a lot. So I'm thinking, yeah, more drizzles and more bullions and then beads. Now in retrospect, I could say I might have tucked these down a little bit too much, and I can go ahead and play around with them, but can you see how it's starting to unravel? That's the nature of this fiber. And so it's because I've been handling it. So it's something to think about. If you're not sure if you're going to like that effect, this might not be the fiber to use for something like that. But I like having all those threads. I might even take some individual embroidery floss and get some more kind of like dangly threads happening in here. And if I want to make this bigger, I can add another few rows of French knots around the outside, but I'm not so sure that I want to do that. I'll think about it. I would say that probably one of the most difficult challenges on this piece is that I just didn't have enough variety of tones. When I've been working on the brown pieces, I find them much more interesting because I have a lot of variety of tones. But really all my burgundy wine-colored threads just were so close together. Now you could certainly bring in another color as an accent. You can see the little white coming through, and I could add that. But I'm going to push through on this challenge because it's good for me. It's good stretch, and it's just good gaining knowledge. And this is a thicker thread, so it's going to give a different look to the bullion knot. So at least I'm getting the texture. Even if I'm not getting a wide variety of color, I'm getting a variety of textures. Because I want this to be a really long one, I'm going to very carefully slide the loops down, which is going to give me more room to keep looping. It's kind of a tricky dance doing it like this, but that's going to give me a really long loop. And because it's longer than the length, it's going to stick up, which means I can either leave it up like that or I can tack it down. For right now, I'm going to leave it as it is. And then I'm going to come up with another one. All right, let's decide what one's going to be the top. Yeah, this is just sort of feeling like the top. I might cut that loop. And if I do that, I might cut it so that we have a short and a long. I like that. So this is embroidery floss, and I think I'm going to split it into just 3. This is a doll needle, so it's much longer than a bullion needle. Harder to do with the thick threads, but it works great with skinny ones. I think I've got one skinny one here, so let's do another one over here. And it takes a long time to twist around those very narrow. I'm just afraid that's not going to stay. So, there we go. Now, of course, while you're doing the drizzle stitch like this, you could be adding a bead each time as well. You could string a bead onto your thread and then cast it on, and you would have a beaded drizzle. I'm just pushing it down tight just because I want to get more stitches cast on if I can. Okay. right, let's see how long this one's going to be. I'm just going to slowly work it off the edge of the needle. It's kind of tight. It's a little bit longer than the one next to it. So yeah, I could go even longer the next time. Okay, so I think that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some more drizzles, and they can either dangle or be tacked down, and some more bullion knots. I forgot to turn on the camera when I was doing some beads, so I will try to bring you up to speed with everything. I think it's about done. So I took it off the hoop. I've added kind of some dangly bits. I've added my beads, which I really like. But here's what I ran into. When I looked at how I was going to roll this back, I'm going to always see some of this white, and that's not desirable. It's going to be a lot of steps if I want to hide it because I was stitching on a piece of white fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this very basic wool, and I'm going to do a few rows of French knots around here, and that way as it makes the curve for me to tuck the backings under, it's going to give you that same look of red. So I'm just going to keep doing the same thing around here for a few rows, make the circle a little bit wider, and then I'll come back and show you how I'm going to finish it off.